innovative solutions, coaching, counseling, naturopathic medicine, insights for successful living, and getting better with Ann Beal.
Welcome. I'm Ann Beal, your host, and my co-host is here, Dr. Jim Slaughter.
Hey, everybody. Good to have you today.
We are so excited to have Scott Schara. He is joining us to talk to us about what's happening in the hospitals and in the medical industry, profiting off of death, basically. A lot of you may know by now what's happening in the hospitals and what happened during COVID. So many people dying who were not even that sick. So Scott is here to share his story and his foundation for his daughter, who was, we all believe, killed in the hospital. So Scott, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Scott, what is the name of your foundation? I want people to hear it and your website and how to contact you before we start. And I'm going to mention it throughout just so people know.
So we have a 501c3 foundation, and the name is Our Amazing Grace's Light Shines On, Inc. And the website is ouramazinggrace.net. So we started that shortly after Grace passed, but at this point, we've only done one grant simply because all of our efforts have been in sharing the story. I mean, I'm working 70 to 90 hours a week just getting the story out yet. So there's, the time is very limited because, we're trying to save people's lives.
Well, can you share kind of what you've been through, what your mission is from here, and just kind of let people know what happened to Grace?
Sure. So Grace went into the hospital on October 6th of 2021. She had COVID, but she specifically had oxygen saturation at 89%. And we unfortunately perceived that as an emergency. Grace was never vaccinated. We were on the frontline doctor's protocol. And if we would not have taken her to the hospital and just got oxygen and a steroid, Grace would be alive today. Unfortunately, we checked her into the hospital, and I was with her until October 10th when I was taken out by an armed guard. I was challenging what was happening, and ultimately it got to be to the point where they didn't like that anymore. So we hired an attorney. My daughter Jessica was able to take over as a replacement advocate. My wife had COVID at that point, so she couldn't do it. And we had 44 hours without advocacy, and during that time, the day before I was taken out, they started her on a sedation drug called Precedex. During the 44 hours we didn't have advocacy, they increased the rate of Precedex 7 times. And so instead of taking care of Grace, they sedated her. When Jessica finally got in the room, she just thought Grace was sleepy. We had no idea that she was sedated, but Grace was still herself in spite of being sedated. And that will dive into her last day. So October 13th, just the anniversary was just 4 days ago of her death. We received a call in the morning at about 8 o'clock on that day. And the purpose of the call was the doctor wanted to have our decision on a pre-authorization for a ventilator. This was their 5th request. And we said no again. And I believe at that point we signed Grace's death certificate for that day because they weren't going to make the money that a ventilator would yield the hospital. So he switched gears as soon as we said no again and said we should work on nutrition. Grace was malnourished at this point because they wouldn't let me feed her. They wouldn't let Jess feed her. And the nurses only gave her a few protein shakes. So the doctor recommended a feeding tube. And he had said, Grace had such a good day yesterday, which we knew because Jessica was there. So in spite of being sedated, Grace's oxygen was at 98, 99% the whole night long. He said, because she had such a good day, we should work on feeding. He recommended the feeding tube. So we unknowingly agreed to a feeding tube and the sequence of events that happened next. This is everything I'm going to tell you is 100% true, less this one thing, which is my hypothesis is that we signed her death certificate that day by saying no to the ventilator. And this sequence of events shows they did a whole bunch of things in a row to take her out that day. So we'll walk through that next unless you have a question.
Well, I know that knowing what we know now about what the hospitals were paid, depending on what the patient was given, they do get a lot of money if someone dies of COVID. And so there's more money if you put them on a ventilator. But without the ventilator, they would have gone for her dying of COVID, right?
Well, yes, they received $20,500 for listing acute respiratory failure as the first cause of death and then COVID-19 pneumonia as the second cause of death. And it just so happened that the hospital ICU rooms were at max capacity the day Grace died, and the emergency room was also at full capacity. So again, this is my theory, is that they took Grace out that day because we wouldn't authorize a ventilator, which of course was never needed. A ventilator is never needed in COVID, to be blunt. A ventilator has a 90% kill rate, but the hospital receives approximately $300,000 by putting a person on the ventilator.
Yes.
So we said no. We set a series of actions in motion to kill Grace. And so what happened, as soon as we got off the phone with the doctor, my daughter Jessica said to the nurse, who was a 14-year experienced ICU nurse, which is significant. This was not a rookie. She said to the nurse that she was going to take a shower. There's a shower in the room. And the nurse said, you can't take a shower in the room. So this is really odd. But when you hear what happened next, it fits the crime. So Jessica said, well, when my dad was in the room, you allowed him to take a shower. And she said, I don't care what we did for your dad. You can't take a shower in the room. So Jessica asked Grace, is it okay if I go home to take a shower? And Grace was prone at that time, so she shook her head yes. And so Jess lives only 5 minutes away. She was back inside of an hour. When she got back and started gowning up, she overheard the doctor in charge of Grace's care, another doctor, and the 14-year ICU nurse say the family's not going to like this. During that hour, Jessica was gone. They strapped Grace down to the bed and made her go to the bathroom in the bed. So what's the reason?
That's terrible.
He had told us earlier that day, Grace had such a good day yesterday. In fact, he told us we should get her up and get her sitting on a chair, get things moving. And here, when she wants to go to the bathroom, they strap her down. So what's the reason? Well, I reviewed all the doctor's reports, and there's 22 reports that were written in the 7 days that Grace was in the hospital. They referenced that Grace had Down syndrome 36 times. Well, they strapped her down because she had Down syndrome. If you and I were in the hospital, we would tell the nurse, no, I'm not going to the bathroom in the bed. Help me out. That's your job. But that's not Grace's personality, nor any Down syndrome child's personality. So now they use that as an excuse to increase the Precedex dose to 14 times the original dose. The package insert, which is the rules they're supposed to follow for Precedex, says to not use for more than 24 hours or it causes acute respiratory failure. Remember, I said that's the first cause of death listed on the death certificate. They directly caused Grace's acute respiratory failure, the first cause of death, by using Precedex for 4.5 days.
What is
Precedex? It's supposed to be used for Precedex is a sedation med. And the reason they use Precedex is because they're hoping the patient or their family is going to approve a ventilator. And the patient has to be sedated in order for a ventilator to be inserted. So that's why they do it. But then on top of that, there's two other things that are significant that happen. As soon as a patient is sedated, their room gets classified as ICU. Grace never changed rooms, nor did the care change. But the amount of money the hospital received changed because they're getting the ICU bonus instead of a regular room bonus. And then most important is you can't take the patient out. So, I replay when I was taken out by the armed guard when I take Grace with me. And the fact is if I would have, the alarm bells would have went off in my head and I wanted to take her with me, I would have had to sign off on a concept called against medical advice.
Right.
So once a patient is sedated, the hospital now has the right to the patient. The parent doesn't even have the right anymore. So you have to sign over the financial responsibility to yourself and the responsibility for the patient, which of course I would have gladly have done if I knew that they had an agenda. So then the next thing that happened, they gave her a dose of Lorazepam at 11:25. At 10:48 now in the morning, she's at this 14 times dose of Precedex. Well, now they give her an anti-anxiety med when she's almost knocked out. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Then at 11:37, they put the feeding tube in. They don't start feeding her until 1:59, 2 hours and 20 minutes later. And at this point, Grace was completely knocked out. Jessica was in the room watching all of this.
This is
at
terrible.
5:46, they gave Grace another dose of Lorazepam. 3 minutes later, another dose of Lorazepam. At 6:15, a 2 milligram dose of morphine as an IV push. So in 29 minutes, she had the Precedex, Lorazepam, and morphine that would have taken all of us out.
Yes.
So that is the true second cause of death. And when I started studying this was in April. Grace died in October. I had about 500 hours of research in April. And that sequence of how this happened got me to realize Grace was murdered. So for that to happen, those 3 drugs are contraindicated according to the morphine package insert. So in order for this to happen, not only did the doctor have to consciously order those 3 meds against the package insert in 29 minutes, but the pharmacist who would have known better had to sign off on the order. The alarm system for the hospital had to be overridden because those meds are contraindicated. And the nurse, going back to what I said about the nurse, the 14-year experienced ICU nurse, had to deliver those meds knowing what was going to happen. So that's where it's open and shut case in my mind. And the third cause of death, which of course is the most egregious, which when I were talking about off air briefly, is they put an illegal DNR order on Grace.
Yes.
And we found this out. So at 6:15, they gave her the morphine. At 7:20, Jessica called us panicking. She said, "Dad, Grace's numbers are dropping like crazy." She called us on FaceTime. So we start screaming. I said to Jeff, "Get the nurses in." She won't come in. She said they won't come in. She estimated 30 nurses in the hallway at this point because the shift change. So Cindy and I start screaming, "Save our daughter." And they hollered back, "She's DNR." This is the first we knew of any DNR. So we hollered back, "She's not DNR, save our daughter." They refused, and we watched Grace die at 7:27, 7 minutes later on FaceTime. We found out subsequently in the legal research that's been done that the doctor put the DNR order on Grace at 10:56 that morning, 8 minutes after the Precedex was near max dose. One of the attorneys who reviewed that timeline said that he believed they had to put the DNR order on them because they thought the Precedex was going to take her out.
Dang.
And so in order to finish the dirty deed, they had to put the DNR order on. So, I mean, you can be the judge after hearing that, but I mean, my theory is we signed her death certificate that day, and how can she be doing so great in the morning and, less than 12 hours later, she's dead? In the sequence of events, you don't do that to anybody unless your goal is to take them out.
Well, and let me ask you, the Lorazepam, is that a tranquilizer as well? Or is it I was trying to remember about Lorazepam.
It's considered an anti-anxiety.
Yeah, anti-anxiety medicine.
In that family.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you have the medical records, because we've heard these stories over and over from people, but we haven't heard anyone who has all the evidence that you have of actual, all the medical records of what they did. The lady here that had it happen at the hospital here near us, she described the same thing happening, and them making her DNR and her husband trying to get her out and them wanting to put her on a ventilator. They did give her remdesivir, and they were saying she's DNR and they're not going to resuscitate. And the husband was yelling and screaming at him, and he got taken out. And so this seems to, when I read all of your stuff, and this seems like now your life mission to let everyone know. I'm very terrified of hospitals now because of so many people that died in the hospital that went in well, not well, but a little sick. I would have thought once you got Grace to the hospital, she would have been okay. They would have done everything they could do to help her, not harm her. And that is not what was going on during COVID. Do you know who pays those benefits for all those using that protocol? Where does the money come from?
It comes from us. It's the taxpayers are paying it.
Yeah, it's our
You can't
government
make
paying
up the
them.
numbers. It's average of $100,000 per COVID patient that's in the hospital, and that's in bonus money. That's from the government. So during the first 22 months of COVID, Dr. Paul Merrick testified to this fact at the Ron Johnson hearing in January of 2022. At that point, there were 4 million hospital cases, and $100,000 a piece was $400 billion that was paid in bonuses.
Why would
through the
you
first
pay?
22 months of COVID.
I just don't understand
so
why they would pay bonuses for protocols, right, that are going to kill you, or even, I mean, when in the past have they ever paid bonuses for certain protocols? Our government.
Well, that's Dr. Peter McCullough brought this up early on, that there's no research component to this virus. You know, they're paying bonuses for death instead. So, you know, as this gets real dark as you start digging into it. So, you know, I was not awake at all, but as this research has progressed, I learned about Agenda 2030, and that fits like a glove. And I'll just, if somebody's not familiar with that, I'm not going to dive into it now, but it's essentially the sustainability agenda that the elites of the planet have come up with to control the climate and control the population. So I'll just give you statistics. In the United States has only 4.3% of the world's population. We're the only country with over 1 million hospital deaths related to COVID. So how can that possibly be? The next closest country is India. India has 4 times the population of the United States, and their footprint on the planet is only 1/3 of the United States. So we have 1.1 million deaths. India has 520-some thousand deaths, so less than half, yet their population is 4 times. Well, we're following the remdesivir and ventilator protocols to the T. Now, Grace was taken out by another protocol, and we're sharing that. But the way Grace was taken out is on the minority end. The ways that are approved, remdesivir is the standard of care. Remdesivir has a 75% kill rate,
right,
3 doses and more. And ventilators are the other standard of care, which have a 90% kill rate. So why would the United States be doing that? Well, they're doing it on purpose. They're trying to get the United States to be the first country to bow down to the sustainability agenda, because if they can get us to do it, everything else falls in place.
Well, and you wonder, like, why they would pay $100,000 for a death from COVID or from any of that. And I know that one of the things you speak on now is hospitals' profits, and just the medical community in general making money to kill people. I mean, that might not be how you say it.
Well, the system that Grace died in was the Ascension hospital system. During the first year of COVID, they received $10 billion. So just process this. So they received, if they will follow the NIH protocol, they get bonuses. In the first year in their system, 142 hospitals, they received $10 billion. So think about the temptation. So these hospital administrators, the NIH is saying, you do this, we'll pay this. So they do the math. Well, boy, we can add $10 billion to our balance sheet per year if we just do what the government says. So they have that. Then on top of that, they have a shroud of secrecy. We're one of the very few cases that somebody was in the room. Most of these cases, they don't allow family members in the room.
Yes.
So this is one of the reasons that we're able to tell the story so objectively. And then third, the PrEP Act gives them immunity from liability. So this is insane what they have set up. And it's still going on. The public health emergency, which is the authority that the government stands on in order to extend this craziness, just got extended for 90 days on October 13th. Just last week, Thursday, got extended for another 90 days. So even though President Biden on September 19th said that the pandemic is over, that's ridiculous. The last day I looked was October 5th. 1,085 people were murdered in the hospital with COVID on their death certificate. On October 5th, 1,085 people. The week ended September 20th. which is the day after Biden announced the pandemic is over, there were 29,000 new hospital admissions for COVID in the United States. It's not over at all.
No. And, okay, so it's so interesting to me because when you pay people bonuses for medical procedures, they're going to do it for people that don't need it. My husband had a CT scan of his whole body, and nothing was wrong. And a few weeks later, he was at his primary care doctor, who was also his friend. And he said to him, "Hey, I see you haven't had a colonoscopy." And Jim said, "But I had a CT scan, so my colon's fine. There's nothing wrong." And he said, "Yeah, but I get more money. I get bonuses if you follow the protocol. So would you just do it for me and go ahead and get a colonoscopy?" And Jim said, "Absolutely not." And
you wish you had your tape rolling at that time. I hear these stories from people. I heard one last night when I was driving. I talked with a friend who shared another story like that. You just wish that all of these were on tape and, would just keep playing over and over on Tucker Carlson.
Yeah. Yeah.
Scott, one of the things that comes to my mind, and, as a parent and just as a human being, I am infuriated by what happened to you and your family and to Grace. And I feel a dark emotion welling up inside of me, just hearing the story and thinking about it and the implications of it and the injustice of it, the inhumanity of it. And so one of the questions that comes to my mind is, how you handle that dark emotion that you must feel. And for me, I would think I would be angry to the nth degree, and I'd be resentful, and I would have lots of things going on in me like that, maybe even a desire to retaliate in some way, and yet often those attempts are put down. So I was wondering, what did you do with what you must have been feeling?
That's an outstanding question. Hardly anybody ever asked that question, but it's maybe the best question somebody could ask. And what happened to me is I went into the hospital 3 days after Grace died, and I just about died on October 16th. Mm-hmm. And during the time I was there, so that hospital saved my life because they did not follow the protocol. And that's another story, but it's one reason I can tell this story objectively. Second of all, God made me a certain way. So he made me analytical. I can do this research. I can compartmentalize the story. But that doesn't really answer your question. What happened to me in the hospital and after I got out is he put an attitude of forgiveness in me. I never asked for it, but he did it because he knew. Obviously, he knew the day and time Grace was going to die before she was born, and he knew this would light a fire under me. You can't be an angry dad telling a story. So he put a spirit of forgiveness in me, and it's interesting because I never asked for it, and it's not something you can do on your own. Nobody could forgive the doctor nurse who murdered your daughter. That's impossible. Right. But that's what the gospel is about. We don't have a gospel if we can do it on our own.
It is amazing. It's amazing. Go ahead.
I was just going to say thank you for that. And it would have to be supernatural, I think. And sounds like that's exactly what you experienced.
That's right on.
Yeah.
It's also interesting, the correlation, between what they did at that hospital with your daughter and what they did at the hospital. I'm just so glad you went to a different hospital. And I assume your wife went to a different hospital as well.
She never went into the hospital. Strangely, her oxygen, even though she was worse off than Grace and I, with symptoms, her oxygen never went below 95%. So one of the things I researched early on is, why did Grace and I end up with low oxygen? We were all under the same protocols. And Dr. Chetty, who's a South African doctor, had done some great research, and I stumbled across his research and found out that if you have a genetic disposition to clot and produce inflammation, it'll produce low oxygen with the Delta variant. And I knew I had both of those genetic dispositions pre-COVID. So it's very likely that Grace inherited those from me, even though we never tested her. And so that's why that's why we ended up with low oxygen.
That, and I read your story and I read about what the other hospital did. That's what everyone should have done. But that hospital that treated you didn't make much money from you as a patient.
That's right.
Compared to, the horrible treatment. I mean, what our hospitals seem to have become is the worse they treat you, the more money they get. If you die, the more money they get. And it's not about, it wasn't during, and I don't know if it still is, but it wasn't during COVID to necessarily heal somebody. But you also said there was a difference between vaccinated and unvaccinated. And you also noticed because she had Down syndrome.
Yeah, this is significant. I mean, they referenced the fact that Grace had Down syndrome 36 different times, but they also referenced that she was unvaccinated. In fact, I'll read it right out of I have it here, so I'm just going to read it right out of the doctor's report. So this is the COVID expert. The first day Grace was full day in the hospital was October 7th. I have his report right in front of me, and he wrote right in the first day's report, unfortunately, I think the patient probably would not be here if she had been fully vaccinated. So they had a bias toward Down syndrome. The fact that we weren't vaccinated, they referenced that we're Christians. Just in his first report, he referenced that we're Christians twice. And then he said, and this is just, it's not comical, but it just, you get their bias. He wrote, that's us, followed the frontline doctors' misinformation campaign. He referenced that twice in the first report. So, I mean, they were thumbing their nose at ivermectin, and the whole frontline doctors. These guys, it was an attitude of arrogance that was.
Well, and they at that time, I guess they believed in the vaccine. It's interesting. We both were treated by the frontline doctors when we got COVID, and we got quick really fast using ivermectin and zinc and things like that. And so, we're interviewing Stella tomorrow, Stella Emanuel. And it's crazy that it sounds like they had an agenda against the frontline doctors, an agenda against Christians, an agenda against natural medicine, and a kind of an agenda against Down syndrome or handicapped people. Did you see all of those?
I saw all of it. I mean, it sure seems crystal clear to me. That's all circumstantial evidence in the pursuit of justice with this. But I mean, it's pretty real. Yeah. I mean, why are those things even referenced? And I tell people now, a podcaster interviewed me about 2 months ago. He said, Scott, he heard the whole story, which takes about an hour, all the intricate details. And he said, it's not safe to be hit by a car anymore. And so I tell people now, if you get hit by a car, what is going to happen is you're unconscious. The ambulance takes you to the nearest hospital. They call your next of kin. So, they go through their checklist. What's your church affiliation? Sounds like an innocent question. Are you vaccinated? I mean, so if you're Christian unvaccinated, I mean, you are a goner unless you have somebody literally advocating, and the paradigm of advocation has changed. So when I went into the hospital with Grace, I thought I'm just going to be there to comfort her, right? I mean, that's what you do. You sit with the person in the hospital, so they're not alone. That's what we used to call advocacy.
Yeah.
I'm telling you now, if that's your attitude when you go in and sit with your loved one, they will die. You have to have a perspective of advocacy that the hospital's goal is to take your loved one out. And if you start with that lens, you look through that lens, now you've got the proper attitude as an advocate in the hospital.
Yes, we've also seen them doing all these tests. They don't find anything, but they just keep looking and running tests. They say we need to run more tests. They're just going to keep looking. And then if they find the smallest thing, they're going to find something. We've had so many people have surgeries that were unnecessary. It's just the craziest thing. And all of those family members could not be with those patients, but the doctors and the nurses and all the the janitors and all those people could come in and out of the hospital and go home to their kids who go to school, and they could go to the grocery store, and they could go all those places where they could catch COVID and come back into the hospital. The only people who couldn't come in were the loved ones of the family who would actually be able to keep watch and help out and make sure that their family member was okay. And without that, people are dying.
And, another piece to this puzzle, which is strange, is once COVID is listed on the death certificate, the government paid the family $9,500 to bury the person they killed. So we never took the money. My wife called it their dirty money. She said, we're not going to take their dirty money. And that was right, because by taking that, we already knew they murdered her, right? So by taking that money, we would be agreeing that that's okay. And so to us, we're not, with the legal case, we're not going to take any money. All we care about, if there's any money involved, it's going to get plowed back in so more people can get justice through the legal system. But what we would like to have changed, and just one thing only, is the death certificate changed to the truth, because the truth is not on the death certificate.
Yeah, that they killed her. It was the medicine.
Correct. So you process, they caused the event, and then they pay the money to bury your loved one. So it's the perfect crime, right? The person who commits the crime now also is involved to make it look like they didn't do it.
Yeah.
It just, you know what, and so much, we believe in natural medicine, and it seems like a lot of the illnesses, even Alzheimer's and heart disease and all those, are caused by the medicine that they give out. And then you become a lifetime patient of the doctor who created the illness.
Well, that's of course right on. I forgot the drug they give for when you're diagnosed with heart disease. I don't know why it slips my mind right now. It's to reduce cholesterol.
Statin drugs.
Oh, shoot.
Statin.
Yeah. So they just so they immediately, you get diagnosed with heart disease. I know this because I was diagnosed 5 years ago, and they want to put me on a statin. So I started digging into it. Well, that's not right. In fact, cholesterol is not even the cause of heart disease. But they have this way of getting to thinking about that, and they give you a statin, which then reduces your cholesterol so they can show you, look, we did a great job. Well, they didn't do anything. In fact, they set you up for the eventual stint, which is their goal. So then they have you as this patient that just produces an income.
Yes, and statin drugs cause they cause Alzheimer's and congestive heart failure and diabetes, and there's so many things that statin causes. I know, they know it's not cholesterol, and that's what's so frustrating. They know it's oil, but I just hate this story. It's like, what has happened to our world when you see all this? It's just, and then you digging into it now. I know you were interviewed by RFK Jr., Robert Kennedy?
Nope, I haven't been interviewed by him yet, but I've been interviewed by Children's Health Defense.
Yes, and that's his organization, right?
Correct.
Yeah, because you have so much. For the first time, when I was reading it, and I just encourage everyone to look at medical records, get the medical records, see what they did to your loved one. And then if someone's in the hospital, I don't like anyone going in the hospital. And I always tell my friends to just get out of there, go in for what you went in for, but get out of there as soon as you can. When they tell me they're in the hospital, I tell them just get out as soon as you can. I'm just terrified of them being in there.
Well, that's right on. There's a concept that has really helped me understand what's going on. So first, you realize what's going on is this is a world without God.
Yeah.
So
right.
This is a predictable outcome for rejecting God. So that's really the big why behind this. But what's helped me understand how this can possibly happen is the banality of evil. So, it's funny how some of these interviews go, and I have the stuff at my fingertips, and some you just lose it. But the Adolf Eichmann trial was studied by Hannah Arendt. Thanks, Scott. So Hannah Arendt studied the Adolf Eichmann trial, and she coined the phrase "banality of evil." And she was trying to wrap her head around how could this happen in Nazi Germany, and the same thing is happening today on a worldwide scale. So just take an example, and I can you can just process this idea over everything that's happening. So apply the banality of evil to Down syndrome children, just specifically. So in the United States, Down syndrome children are murdered in the womb at the rate of 67%.
Right.
So that has become the standard of care. So the doctor recommends when the young couple gets pregnant, he congratulates them, sets up their amniocentesis. They're not the wiser, right?
Mm-hmm.
That test shows that the son or daughter is going to have Down syndrome. He recommends an abortion. They follow through with that. And this is the standard of care. And these people in the hospital setting have been trained that we have limited resources. We need to ration care. We've got to take out these useless eaters. So now these young people taking care of my daughter would have never even had her. They would have aborted her. So this has been going on for decades.
And Down
COVID
syndrome
was just the excuse to implement it. That's all.
And Down syndrome children are just wonderful. I mean, there is this personality that they have that you just don't experience anywhere else. It isn't it's not a horrible death sentence to have a child like that. It isn't.
Oh my gosh, it's the best thing God ever gave us.
Yeah.
Grace was an absolute gift. I mean, she showed love the way we're supposed to love.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I can love the way Grace loves when I'm sleeping. I mean, she just knocked it out of the park. She was our whole life was her. I mean, everybody who has a Down syndrome child, their whole life becomes that child because they're just full of love. You just follow what, at Grace's funeral, people were coming up to Cindy and I and saying, "Oh, you guys did such a great job raising Grace, blah, blah, blah." We didn't do a great job. We have to do anything.
Right.
When you can love the unlovable, now you're doing a great job. But loving Grace was a snap. All you had to do was, you didn't have to do anything.
Yeah.
She was a great kid.
Well, and I know that in Nazi Germany, the strange thing is that the Jews were following protocol and they believed in the people that were telling them. I don't know, it was their own leaders or their own Jews that were telling them to follow protocol, what the government wanted. And that was before they ended up, being taken away. But everything that they were telling them to do was actually entrapping them and harming them and killing them.
Right on. Yep. That's happening today. So that's a little bit different angle. So the Jewish leaders at the time, I got involved studying the Holocaust in June as part of this research, and I'm doing joint interviews now with Grace Schara, who's a Holocaust survivor. Mm-hmm. And Vera has really opened up the door for me to see this. But one of the things that happened in the research is you see how the Jewish leaders at the time, they really led the Jews to the concentration camps. And the beginning of this, by the way, was the T4 program, where they took out German children who are mentally disabled and physically disabled. So the T4 program, and so Grace's death is an analogy for the T4 program because they took out the disabled and elderly first. And so this parallel is eerie. But anyway, the parallel you're talking about was the Jewish leaders really ignored what the Nazis were doing and told the Jews to obey. Well, this is happening with the Christian pastors today.
Yeah.
Most of the Christian pastors, I mean, you should see, we've spoken in a few churches, but we should be in every church. But they don't want us in there because they're going along with it. This is the same thing. Up to 100,000, I don't know the exact number, but the research I did is up to 100,000 pastors have been trained by FEMA to round up their congregations in the event of a federal declared emergency and to put their congregation into, they even call it camps.
No, I did not know that. We just read George Barna's research about all the pastors across the United States, and that 75% of them don't even believe in the basic tenets of the Bible. And
right, so it's no shocking that they would buy into, the government is in charge.
yes, and Jim has been interviewing people on the liberal Christian left, the Christian left in the church, and that if it was Hitler today, they said 70% of the churches would follow and the other ones would be too afraid and a few would stand up. And so it's such a sad.
It's really sick.
It is sick.
Yeah.
What I don't understand, though, about the government, well, I guess with their agenda, but, I'm always looking at PubMed.gov research that the government does, and they have lots of research on ivermectin. In fact, I studied all that to find out that ivermectin apparently works to cure breast cancer. And I read all that research, and we ended up giving our dog who had breast cancer. I told the vet, I showed him all this research from PubMed.gov, and he read it and he goes, well, let's try it. But he was shocked that the government had done all this research on ivermectin and everything it cures, because listening to the media and Fauci, you'd think it kills people, right? But they also have all this research on remdesivir, and they even have all the research on, sea kelp. Fucoidan was what they call it, how it cures lupus. But have we ever heard about that? How it cures autoimmune disease? But we've never heard that. There's 5 years of research on Fucoidan, sea kelp. And I thought the government is doing all this research on these things, but they're telling us natural is bad and that we're all crazy to do anything natural with ivermectin or even hydroxychloroquine. My mom had lupus and she was on hydroxychloroquine for years. And she was actually still on it when COVID started. And so for them saying it was dangerous and would kill people, I'm like, what? I just, it went against everything that they actually know in their own research. You can see that. And so it's just crazy.
Absolutely right on. But there is a narrative to make sure people don't hear this.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right on. Their own research shows it.
So Scott, my question
I saw with Grace's case that I thought, well, ivermectin's right on the NIH recommended protocol.
Yeah.
But they won't use it.
Right.
Well, it's not money, right? Go ahead, Jim.
No, I was was wondering, you mentioned something about letting people hear and getting the word out. And I think it's really important that we do that. And
yes.
We're going to be, shooting this interview out to as many people as we can over and over again, not just one time. And so we're going to be informing our listening audience and people who aren't even a part of our audience yet. Eventually will hear this. And so we're glad about that. I know you've got to be taking strides to do that as well. So what can be done to let people know that this is what has happened in our hospitals and just the kind of information that you've been giving us? How can all of us get that information out to the people in our country?
Yeah, that's another great question. You have great questions, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you.
What I've been sharing when people ask that question is the parable of the talents. So obviously with Grace's story, for some reason, God said, I'm going to open these doors for you. And we've been walking through the doors. And so we've got quite a platform to share the story, which I'm very thankful for. But if you don't have that platform, what you can do, everybody has at least one talent. So what you do with it is what counts. And so sharing this podcast with everybody in your contact list, that's a very simple example. It takes you minutes to do that, and it's something that you can do. And you're going to have some backlash, but isn't that what Jesus has?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's the reality. You're going to get backlash. Just select every single person in your contact list, and some of them are going to think you lost your mind. But that's where we're headed. You might save a life.
Ours think they lost it a very long. We lost it a very long time ago. Way past that one. I'm sorry.
We're in a select club.
Now we went to your website and we watched. You had some videos on there, and they were very interesting. We saw the one with you and Vera, I think, about the Holocaust. We didn't get to watch all of it. Yeah. So on that website, would you give the name out again?
It's ouramazinggrace.net. And
is that how people would reach out to you? Is that the best way?
Yes, there's a place on the website a contact us tab. So if people want to reach me, they can do so there.
Well, and I looked at the date today, and I told Jim, this happened almost exactly a year ago to you.
Right.
And it has, I thought, well, this is yeah.
Grace died October 13th. Yes.
Yeah. And you almost died October 16th?
Yes.
Yeah. So in this year, you've been on quite a journey, you and your family.
It's been, I'm doing this full time. It's one of the many miracles is that I think, why did I get heart disease? And, it's because of this. I had trained my guys to run their business. And so I've been doing this full time. The guys are running the business. I've been on about 300 programs now. And this has become our mission. I don't know what God has intended next, but I mean, that's what we're dedicated to get this message out.
Well, and it's a great gift in a way that you have that, and you have to just be able to grieve and be able to have a purpose and a mission in light of everything that happens. People who have that do so much better because your child dying, and they say, is the highest stressor of all. It is worse than anything else, and a lot of couples don't get through it. They divorce. A lot of people just get really depressed. And when you have something like this, I mean, you are kind of a zombie walking for a long time, like walking around with a hole in you, but you're walking and you're doing, and it helps you recover, whatever kind of recovery that is, to survive. There's that book on grief called Survive, Alive, Thrive. And this would get you through that so much faster.
Well, it seems like that for me, at least. I can't answer that for other people, but it has been a help for me for sure.
How is your wife?
It's tough. We lost another child 4 years ago. And so.
Oh, no, gosh.
Wow, Scott, we just really want to talk to you again. We love this time with you. We're so thankful that we have it. And we will do everything we can, and we'll get this out, and we'll put it everywhere. And we just wish you just so many blessings from God, and that He holds you and comforts you and your family.
Well, thanks a lot for the opportunity. This is really a nice interview. I appreciate it.
Good. You're sure welcome.
And thank you for giving us the time.
Yeah. God bless you, Scott, and your family. We appreciate you and love you. And we'll look forward, when you can do it, to getting back together again. Okay.
I look forward to it also. Thank you.
Good
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.